Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Metropol TV, the first 24-hour news channel here in Kenya and East Africa. My name is Ali Khan Sachu. I'm your host for the next hour. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today, and there's so much to talk about. Let's start off in Nairobi. This was the comment from the central bank governor, Dr. Patrick Njoroge, who I have a very high regard for. In a nutshell, he said, the economy is doing reasonably well. We have seen a strong rebound in the last 2 years. In 2018, the economy grew by 6.1%, he said. I'm going to bring up this subject with James, who's my guest in the second half, but definitely my impression is people are not feeling that growth. And that's why people are saying, cost of living has gone higher. But nevertheless, from a GDP point of view, this is pretty good, 6.1 to 6.3%. The rain last year had a lot to do with it. Whenever it rains, the economy tends to do well. And I think that's what supported us last year, plus a low oil price. But nevertheless, there's serious challenges in the economy, particularly for SMEs who can't get credit. So we'll try and unpick a little bit of that with James, who is the Vice Chairman of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, and he will be joining me in the second half. Kenya shilling, it's 100.9. The shilling has been one of the best behaved currencies in Africa and practically anywhere in the world. It's been very stable. There was a little bit of a spat, I don't know if you remember, with the IMF, when the IMF said it was a managed currency, and no one really knew what they meant by managed, but what they were saying, it was not a freely tradable currency. But let me ask you this. You can go out anywhere in the street in Nairobi today and change your money into dollars with a 50-cent bid-offer spread. You can't do that in many other African countries. Tanzania, they've clamped down on the bureau de change. Nigeria has a two-tier FX system. Zimbabwe has a voodoo system with 3 different currencies that they're now trying to organize better and consolidate. So I think the IMF was, in this regard, unfair on the Central Bank of Kenya. And in fact, I think one of their most successful components of their operations is actually the management of the shilling. So it gives me comfort. And I think also there's a lot of regional money that comes into Nairobi from our neighbors. They feel safer having it parked here than maybe in Dar es Salaam or Juba or Bujumbura, which probably they perceive as riskier places, as most people do. Let's move on to Kenya Airways. There's been a lot of news and drama. This share is the worst performing share at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. It's down 47% this year. So if you put 100 shillings into that, that would currently be worth 53 shillings. As opposed to Safaricom, where your 100 would now be worth 127. That's called stock picking. You can't just put your money anywhere. You've got to look, analyze what the company is doing and think about the opportunity. In the case of Kenya Airways, their CEO, Sebastian Mikosh, gave an interview to Bloomberg, and he said he wants to buy 50 aeroplanes over the next 6 years. 50. A lot of people were quite skeptical about that on Twitter, I noticed, saying, let's see what the results are, because I think they've been a little bit delayed as far as I'm aware. But he was talking to Airbus. He's talking about the A220. He's saying if the Airbus company offers us a good deal on the pricing, delivery and training, we will adopt it. Speaking about the A380, which is that enormous plane that Airbus was selling, and I've flown on it, that's a great flight to be on, but apparently, according to Sebastian, he said about the A380 that absolutely nobody has ever made any money in running that plane. They're now, I think, finally phasing that one out. But it's interesting, isn't it? One air crash, Boeing share price down 10%, very poor PR response from Boeing. It seemed they didn't really care. They were too big. They weren't bothered. Took them a week to put out a statement. But now they're trying to get on top of the situation. But you straight away saw the switch. Xi Jinping in Paris signing a contract for 25 billion euros to buy Airbus. So look at how fast the world moves. One little mistake, it has a huge impact on businesses, particularly those that are around public safety, like travel. It's really important you manage that well. He also was speaking about this possible merger with the Kenya Airports Authority, or PPP. I'm not sure what the exact characterization is today. It tends to evolve a little from day to day. And Sebastian said, what we're advocating is a massive systemic change. He said, in the country's civil aviation industry, the growth of the airline is essential. And he's basically promoting the idea that KAA and Kenya Airways get together, and KAA comes under the control of Kenya Airways. What they're saying is that they can make better use, they can make the business more profitable if they have greater control over the airport. It's a very competitive world out there. It's in our national interest to have an airline that's working. If we believe we're a hub state, a transit state, we want to play at that level, then we've simply got to have an airline, and we've got to turn this thing around. I know it's a little bit like an oil tanker, I'm sure. Tea prices, and this is a bit of a surprise, have dropped quite sharply. Lots of tea was left unsold at the East African tea auction. 11.7 million kilos offered for sale, only 8.5 million were sold. Little bit surprising. Obviously, last year, good rains, a lot of tea out of Kenya. But if you remember, a few weeks ago, there was that problem between the between the Indians and the Pakistanis in Kashmir, and India removed most favored nation status from Pakistan. And the expectation was that Pakistan would be forced to buy more Kenyan tea, but that seems not to have affected the tea market so far, where prices are weak, supply is high. We're a little bit like Saudi Arabia is to oil when it comes to tea. Now let's go to the rest of Africa. Algeria's embattled president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, the wheelchair-bound since 2013 when he had a stroke, you can't make it up, and who was going to stand for a 5th term until the crowd started to build and said, and were not keen on this idea that he should stay or stand again. And there's a very famous quote by a Polish writer called Richard Kapuscinski, and he talks about revolution, and he says this: if the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. You've probably been watching the news. Every week the crowd grew bigger and bigger and bigger. They did not disperse, they did not go home, and therefore the revolution was not over. But the Algerian pouvoir, these are the people behind the scenes, the kind of puppet masters who are sort of pushing Bouteflika around in his wheelchair but controlling the purse strings. They want to manage this process. They don't want a revolution in the streets, and clearly they're trying to work out a solution. And there's a famous saying by the French, plus ça change, plus ça même chose. Everything stays the same, nothing really changes. But I think the lesson in Algeria is people want change, and if you're not going to deliver it, you're going to see the same thing happen again and again. So my advice to the pouvoir, the folks pulling the strings behind the curtain, is really look to make a substantial change. It's not just going to work if you're going to try more of the same, in my opinion. The head of the army in Algeria is trying to remove President Bouteflika via Article 102 of the Constitution. Article 102 basically says that the president is unfit to serve, and then you can remove him. But that seems to be the process everybody's waiting on. Algeria, third biggest supplier of gas to Europe. The Europeans are always worried about the gas supply from Russia. Russia has been known to switch it on and switch it off in deep midwinter, and everyone can freeze if they're unhappy with you. So the Europeans want to keep their options open. That's why Algeria is so important to them. Of course, it's on the Mediterranean as well, with Libya in practically a civil war. There's a lot of uncertainty. That uncertainty has pushed a lot of folks out of Africa into Europe. The Europeans want to stop that. And so, this is very, very key country geopolitically, politically, and economically in that area. Very interesting article I came across in Business Week talking about the Sudan. Listen to this. When the Jordanian army went shopping for land in northern Sudan in late 1999, its scouts came across what appeared to be a food-growing paradise. They could draw water from the nearby Nile, which was embarrassingly bountiful. Local officials were bending over backward to offer favorable financial terms. The food supply would turn a tidy profit. And apparently this created huge interest. Emiratis, all these Middle Eastern countries where it's too hot to grow food, all piled in. And what this story is telling us is that with all that investment in agriculture, what was the catalyst for the problems in Khartoum? The catalyst was the price of bread. President Bashir forgot the first lesson of power. Keep the food prices low, because throughout history, it's bread riots that bring governments down. Whether President Bashir can survive is an open question. I mean, there's a very famous fellow called Harry Houdini, and they'd tie up Harry Houdini in a box, dump him at the bottom of the sea, and he'd always escape. And he'd come out somewhere, and he was very well known for these particular things. President Bashir is a Harry Houdini, otherwise he wouldn't have stayed in power for 3 decades. But make no mistake, inflation is off the charts, the currency has collapsed. You are not allowed to take, I think, more than $200-300 worth of foreign currency out of the country. We got a very extreme situation. We got Russia, who've come in there and saying, we're going to back you up. The Russians are making quite a big move across Africa in many interesting places. Khartoum is one, and they consider Sudan a very important state for their African presence. So let's keep an eye on what will happen there. I like this. There's an old Sudanese revolutionary song, and it goes like this: we sing in our prison as you tremble in your castle. And certainly President Bashir is trembling, because this thing has been going on for quite a number of weeks. Let's move on to something totally different, e-commerce. Jumia. This is the e-commerce company that was, I think it's about 4 years old. You see it here in Nairobi. It's pretty active. They're in 4 countries. They've had accumulated losses. Listen to this. So far, they've lost $1 billion. That's how much money they've burnt through. This is, of course, that model of e-commerce companies where they forgive losses as long as they can see profit in the future. So they've got losses of $1 billion, but MasterCard, the card people are going to take a 5.1% stake in Jumia for $56 million. Loss-making, $1 billion offside. They're prepared to pay good money for that. And of course, other shareholders are Pernod Ricard, the drinks company. I'm sure you might have tried some of their drinks, Chivas Regal. My uncle Galamson used to love that. That's one of their flagship brands. They're also a stakeholder in there. Rocket Internet, which is out of Scandinavia. Goldman Sachs, MTN. And now what's happening, these guys, MasterCard, have come and bought a stake via private placement, but in a very short few weeks, Jumia will be selling shares on the New York Stock Exchange. You know, it's a fact of life. I mean, I wish they were selling those shares at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. I'm sure Mr. Odunda would be wishing the same. But the point is, you have deep pools of liquidity in New York and London, and they want to tap into those pools. But it's interesting, isn't it? They're saying they're going to sell shares worth about $250 million in the next couple of weeks, and MasterCard is stepping in ahead of that. Moving on to North America, President Trump was talking about closing the border with Mexico, and he's been talking about that quite a few times. And I, for one, think that the border policy, the policy towards immigrants in the US under President Trump, is a shocking moral abomination, I'm afraid, in the way people are being treated. You remember how kids were taken away from their parents and all of that kind of thing. But he wants to shut that border because he's saying 3 Latin American countries are sending lots of people through that border. But this is what was interesting. He said if he does shut down the US-Mexico border, it would hit American consumers. From avocado toast to margaritas, the US is heavily reliant on Mexican imports of fruits, vegetables, and alcohol. And saying about 40% of the US's imports in food, vegetables, and alcohol, and particularly avocados, and I'm going to come to that in a minute, comes from Mexico. So the guy from the Ministry of Agriculture in America says you'll be out of avocados in 3 weeks. Of course, avocados went completely crackers a couple of years ago. This is the millennial thing, right? If you tap Chinese demand, you got 1 billion people interested in your product. If you tap into the millennials, you probably got another 1.5 billion. These are big things. And you saw that. Suddenly, avocado was a super fruit or whatever, and everybody was eating it. They were putting it on their toast. The price of avocados went through the roof. In fact, if you look, a lot of people who've done well in agriculture in Kenya have been growing avocados. But the point I'm making is that that might be a market for us to exploit if he closes that border, though I hope he doesn't. But from that, I remember writing an article in 2018, last year, and I was speaking about the millennials with their avocado eating and crypto trading ways. You know, they love to, they embrace the new, embrace the idea of avocados, embrace the idea of Bitcoin. And before I get to that, this was probably the best avocado I ever tasted. It was at the Mara Fairmont in the Masai Mara, and really was delicious. They grow it in an organic garden, and I still think it's probably beats the Mexican avocados hands down. But putting this into context, I call it the crypto avocado millennial economy. Bitcoin, right? Now, let me first give you some context. I saw a report out of Citibank, I don't know whether it's true or not, I didn't get a chance to check it, which said Kenya is the 7th largest holder of Bitcoin when you compare it to the size of our economy. And that frankly sounds right, because I remember when the market was going up, and remember it went from $1,000 in January 2016 to nearly $20,000 before it collapsed. And everywhere I went, even when I was getting my cappuccino at my local coffee shop, the guy said to me, Ali Khan, where's Bitcoin going? I said, remember one thing in the markets, you don't hold anything forever. When you got a good profit, take it and bank it, leave something for the next person. But the thing about Bitcoin, it's like a religion. People get a religion, they'll buy it, they'll never want to sell it, they believe in it completely. Well, guess what happened this morning? Up in a blink of an eye by 20%. There are not many asset prices that do moves like that in the space of a couple of hours. Very dramatic move, went over 5,000. Remember, the all-time high was nearly 20,000. When it began, it was less than $1, but only gamers knew about it because they used it as the currency to pay for their games. So Bitcoin up 20%, didn't manage to hold 5,000. Just before I came to the program, about 4,700, but a really, really big move. The question is, you know, what is going to happen next? Another report came out of an academic institution saying 85% of trading in Bitcoin is fake. There have been lots of debate about the bona fides of Bitcoin. You remember not too long ago that crypto chap who had everyone's crypto coins in his wallet died, and no one could find the key to his wallet, and that money's all vanished as well. So the lack of security is my big issue with the cryptocurrency markets. But for me, Bitcoin is the most solid cryptocurrency. There's a finite supply. It's got mass adoption and people believe in it. There are more than 1,300 other coins, and really you've got to be extremely careful if you're going to look at any of those outside Bitcoin. But bear in mind the volatility is very high. Starbucks, this is a report about coffee. Listen to this. This is because of coffee prices out of Brazil have collapsed the price of coffee worldwide. To give you a sense, This is the 6th straight quarterly decline in prices, the longest run of losses since 2001. I know President Kenyatta is coming up with a 3 billion shilling coffee fund. He's going to need it, because look at what's happened. The quarterly average price is the lowest since 2005, 2019 now. That's a 14-year low. That's a big deal. And it's dropped 7% this year. It's worst performing commodity anywhere in the world. It's very unfortunate, but just to keep you aware that global coffee prices under significant pressure, worst performing commodity. And on that point, I'd probably plant avocados over coffee, frankly, given the way the world is moving. Oil, okay, that's making new 2019 highs. The price of oil in the first quarter, January to the end of March, we've just ended the first quarter, up 32%. That's a big move in the oil markets, and it's moved higher to fresh 2019 highs. If we move more than 10% higher, it's going to become problematical for us, because imagine the biggest single check we write every month is for oil. Right? That's the biggest single check Kenya writes every month. It's for oil. So we're very sensitive to oil. We do well when the price is low, but now when the price goes low, we don't feel it, because the government's loaded so much tax on it. Each litre, there's more tax you're paying than actually the price of fuel. So you don't really experience a down move. You experience an up move. So I think let's keep an eye on that. Part of the reason the Kenyan economy did as well as Dr. Patrick Njoroge was talking about was because of the reasonably low price of oil. Let's move on to Turkey, where I think they're catching a cold, and if not influenza, and if that influenza starts spreading out of Istanbul, we're going to have problems from South Africa to Brazil to emerging markets and even in African markets. President Erdogan, his first political position was mayor of Istanbul in 1994. His AKP party has controlled Istanbul and Ankara since 1994. That's how many years? 25 years. He lost Istanbul, he lost Ankara, and I think this is a significant reverse. So people are unhappy, inflation is in 20% range, the currency is collapsed, and you can see this unhappiness feeding back. In a lot of our countries outside the developed world, it is the cities which become opposition strongholds, and this is indeed not a good sign for Erdogan and his party. Of course, in the background, you mustn't forget he's a swing state. Look at all the countries around Turkey, Iran, which the Americans aren't happy with and want to do something about. He's bordering on Russia. He's right in the global hotspot area of this world that we live in. Now, he went along and he bought this missile defense system from Putin, S-400. And Putin's also sent some, by the way, to Syria, and sent some to Mr. Maduro in Venezuela as well. Erdogan has bought 4 missile defense systems, total cost $2.5 billion. He's meant to be in NATO. If you're in NATO, you're not meant to be buying the other side's weapon systems. The Americans are very unhappy about that, refusing to deliver some planes that they'd promised to deliver to him. But more than that, they are hitting him in the financial markets. I call it financial warfare. And essentially, Trump, even Obama, are effective at financial warfare. What do I mean by that? You hit his currency, you squeeze, you remove deposits which are sitting there. You cause worry and panic. You've now got these political issues feeding into it. So I think for President Erdogan, it's a very risky moment. The Turkish lira fell as much as 3% today. And frankly, it could fall a lot more. And the issue there is what's called contagion. Will we be able to keep that within Turkey? No way, never has happened since every single crisis, tequila crisis, the Thai baht crisis, it spreads out. So we've got to keep a very close eye on Turkey, where I think President Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, MBZ of Abu Dhabi all want to administer a very big caning on President Erdogan. And he's a little bit like a Shakespeare figure, right? Very proud. But ultimately, right now, his economy is the Achilles heel. He doesn't understand the scope of the problem. And they could lob the equivalent of an enormous missile into the Turkish economy. And I think they could do that at any moment. Britain. I was just telling Stephen as I walked in, and you know, I spend a lot of my time, I feel that I'm British and Kenyan and Indian, so a mixture. And I spent a lot of my time living in the United Kingdom. And as I was walking in, I was thinking, these guys rule the world. 3/4 of it, right? They said the sun never set on the British Empire. We're all products in many ways of that empire. And if you watch the Houses of Parliament, you watch the political developments that we're watching unfold in front of our eyes, you could not imagine how they conquered the world. How did they ever do it? Right? Look at the TV every day. This is the most extraordinary situation I've ever seen. Anne Widdecombe, who was a Conservative MP, said about this, she said, we got the worst Prime Minister since Anthony Eden. Do you remember the Suez crisis? She says, we got the worst opposition Labour leader ever. Jeremy Corbyn, she means. And she says this is the worst parliament since Oliver Cromwell. So we got this extraordinary situation. Today I saw President Emmanuel Macron saying that, look, if you don't get yourself sorted out, you're gone, it's over. And it can happen really quickly. The deadline is the second week of April, right? They've got to get something through. Barnier, the European Union guy, saying, come on, get your act together. So it's still a needle that they simply are unable to thread over there. And the currency is back down, coming near to the 1.3050 against the dollar. The key level is 130. If it breaks that, it's going to go much lower. So let's keep an eye on that. And it takes me back. It takes me back to two observations, right? One is historically, 10 Downing Street has been where the power lies. That's the executive, that's the Prime Minister. The Parliament has not been as powerful, but what you've seen happen over the last few weeks and months with Brexit is power drained from the Prime Minister, notwithstanding her dancing when she came here. You remember she was dancing at UNEP. Power is drained from her, and it's gone in the direction of the Parliament. But whether they're using it effectively, they're simply currently rejecting everything that they're being offered. At the moment, 75% people think they're going to, at the last minute, right at the death, they're going to agree to something. 25% are saying, no, no, no. They're not going to agree to anything. And it's going to, what you think is going to be soft and agreed and controlled is going to turn into a hard Brexit. And this is the concern. And a hard Brexit adds a lot more risk to the equation. That took me back to a very famous Chinese saying by Lao Tzu. Have you heard of Lao Tzu? He said this: men are born soft and supple. Dead, they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead, they are brittle and dry. Thus, what is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. The hard and the stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. The point I'm making is a hard Brexit is not the best option here. And I really hope that the United Kingdom sees a bit of sense and looks to make some kind of arrangement at the last moment before this really takes off, careers off course, and goes somewhere that no one knows where it might go. Thank you very much for listening to my thoughts. I really appreciate it. Please interact with us through social media, Metropol TV, KE, Instagram, Facebook, my Twitter handle. We're interested in feedback. I think it's been a week now. We look forward to all your thoughts and an interchange. After the break, I've got James Muruyu, who's a friend of mine. He's the Vice Chairman of the Kenya National Chamber. He's going to give us a bit of a contrast to what we got yesterday from Anzetse. Today it's going to be more private sector focused, what's happening in our economy, reasons for optimism like Patrick Njoroge or not. Let's see what James has got to tell us. So I look forward to that interview and I hope you'll join us. We'll take a short break. Thank you very much for stopping by, The Smart Investor. My name is Ali Khan Sachu. This channel is called Metropol TV Kenya and is the first 24-hour business news channel here in Kenya and, thankfully, an indigenous one. Welcome. Welcome back to Metropol TV, to The Smart Investor. Thanks for joining us for the second half. I've got James Murray, who is the Vice President of the Kenya National Chamber.
Yes.
And is lobbying to become the President, if I'm not mistaken, James.
Yes, you are. You're right.
James, we wish you the best in that campaign, and I'm sure, knowing you for all these years, that is we in the bag, is it?
I hope so. I hope so. I can only hope. It's an election, and
when is the election?
Hopefully, the first week of June.
Okay.
It was supposed to be last week of May, but because of Ramadan, we pushed it to the first week just after Ramadan.
Okay.
And then we will meet on the ballot box.
Excellent.
Yes.
We wish you the best. We know what good work you've done all this period.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Now, James.
Yes.
This is a business program.
Yes.
You are here, you're involved in the private sector, you have a very good view of what's happening in the economy.
Reasonably.
Yes.
Reasonably
so
good.
Tell us a little bit about what's happening from your perspective. What are the risks? You know, today, every time I go, people are worried about debt to GDP. Some people are telling me we're worried about what's happening in the counties. Other people are saying, you know, if you're not worried, your eyes are closed. What's actually going on?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm
Pleasure.
happy to have you around you, especially this new station. I don't know how old is this station?
So this is our second week.
Second
and
week.
Everybody here, the longest people have been here is a month.
Is that the?
And no, we're really excited. They reached out to me, and I think it's a great idea.
It is indeed.
And you know,
yes.
too many people tell the story from a different angle. So here
absolutely, absolutely. And I hope the smart investor is going to be primarily a business sector that addresses real issues. And right now, if I tell you.
See, Dr. Jorogi, did you see what he said? He said, look, in a nutshell, the economy is reasonably well. We have seen a strong rebound in the last 2 years. The economy grew by 6.1%. But when I speak to people, they're not saying that.
You know, the truth is, there are two sets of growths that we're looking at. Joroge's figures are growing, right? But whether that's cascading down to the ground is another story.
Okay.
And really, that's where the real problem is. But I'll tell you in a nutshell, from where we sit as private sector leaders, and particularly from the chamber, we have addressed a number of issues that are currently negatively affecting the economy. One of the most thorny issues is the growing government debt.
Now, is this debt, is this borrowed money, or this is also not paid?
Unpaid debts to the private sector.
How much is it?
It's running upwards of 200 billion. But we've been knocking at the doors of both the county governments and the national government.
Does that include the county government?
Yes, both.
Yes,
both. The total is
yes.
about 220 billion.
Yes.
We've been knocking, and if you have listened to one of our strongest advocacy agenda as a chamber, is really to unlock this debt, to make sure that businessmen are not thrown out of business, not because of their fault, but because of a county government or a national government that is uncaring. Now, I'll tell you what the tragedy is, Ali Khan. If you look at the number of businessmen who have been listed in the CRB,
yes,
it is growing by the day, through no fault of their own. It is not their fault. But they have rendered services.
So they're not being paid, they've rendered a service.
They've rendered a service, and I'll tell you the tragedy is they've rendered a service to a government institution, and this government institution, because by the time I invoice a government institution, I'm supposed to give an invoice, which includes a VAT component. Now,
yes,
if I don't pay my VAT component, it starts attracting interest. Now, the government hasn't paid me, so I borrow money to actually clear the VAT component of my invoice. Now, the longer the government takes with my debt, the more I'm pressed by the person I borrowed from. And invariably, I fall behind my debt repayment.
James, is this a phenomenon across all sectors, or is it specific to, like, I remember there was a time when it was road contractors who were complaining and there was a lot of bad debts.
Yes, that was during the Kibaki
Yes, there was a
time. There was
period,
unpaid bills,
yes.
yes.
But
Now it's cutting across everything. And you will find it's biting the big boys and the small boys, because the person who supplies stationery to the county government is one of these small SMEs. The mama takes a loan and goes and buys reams of paper and printing material and takes it to the county, and then is not paid.
That's a big number.
It's a big number, and it's really, and I'm appealing to anybody who cares.
But do you
out there
get
today.
traction? Are you getting traction? Is this a priority for the government? When you go in there and say, guys, this is money that's stuck. If you imagine what would happen if it's circulated.
You know, Ali Khan, I'll tell you, what we need is all of us to think about this debt as a national tragedy.
No,
Really, it is a tragedy. It's tragic that we are pushing so many, and you can imagine the natural attrition of SMEs in the first 1 year,
Yeah.
how many of them fall naturally,
Most of
even
them.
when the circumstances are normal. Now, can you imagine now when the circumstances are such,
And there's no credit either.
and there is no credit? Now, just last week, we reminded the president in Mombasa when we
With
met
President
the Ugandans.
Museveni.
Yes,
Yes.
we reminded him that he is operating in the same space with the business community. He's borrowing money, which is more guaranteed than the money that
So
we
the banks
borrow.
want to lend to
so
him.
the bank will run to the treasury bills and bonds, and they're happy to give it that way, and leave us destitute of any credit. So it's becoming increasingly difficult. And what again? Okay, the president then said, "I'm damned if I borrow locally. I'm damned if I borrow outside." It's true. It's just a question, and I think we've ventilated on this
Yes,
issue with you
we have.
in the past.
Yes.
And we've said clearly that unless we put some financial discipline in our borrowing and borrow only that which we can. If you're looking at, for example, development loans, we cannot afford to build a road with a 7-year loan. It's got to be a long term because the repayment are slow and even almost invisible.
So do you think it's also a question of the profile of our loans, that they were taking out too short-term money?
Too short-term.
And these are
Yes.
long-term projects.
Long-term projects.
I mean, when does a railway make money? It typically takes a lot of time.
Long time. I bet you the 1902 railway just probably.
That was a famous story, right?
Yeah.
The Brits used to get so upset about writing the checks.
Exactly. I mean, it's a famous story. So for us to imagine that we can be able to deal with 324 billion
This
over a short
extension,
period.
but also they're now
Now
talking...
there is another
Yes.
almost similar amount for the extension. These are good projects.
Yes.
But they need long-term, low-interest borrowing for us to finance this. If we don't, then we will end up in this situation that we are in, where everybody is crying. And while figures are showing 6% growth projection,
Got 15 profit warnings at the NSC.
you know, we still have a big problem because if you look at the pyramid, and I've given this example,
Yes.
the suffering is not at the top.
It's
It's
at
at
the
the bottom. That's where you have critical numbers.
And also that's where the cost of living has gone up, where it's,
It's where the rubber meets the road.
Yes.
And that's where it bites.
So you're sitting there.
Yeah.
What is the silver bullet? What are you, when you're sitting there with the president, the sea breeze, you've got Museveni over there,
Yeah.
and he's saying, "Come on, I've got 3-4 years to go. How
Yeah.
do I? What should I do?" What's James telling him?
I'm saying there is no economic stimulus that can change this economy except the government paying its debts.
Yes.
Simple and straight.
Yeah.
And beyond there, first of all, they must, and it's sensible to freeze some of these projects that are not of immediate urgency, and look at how you can deal with the backlog there.
Yes.
Deal with your debts, bring them up to speed, and then from there say, right, going forward, Ali, we are going to build a road of 5 kilometers because that's what we have money for. And the next 5 kilometers can be budgeted in the next financial year.
So you're
and
talking
provide.
more about a Thatcher profile, right?
Yes, a Thatcher profile. And
run it
leave
like a supermarket.
Exactly.
Run it like a Duca. You can't
Duca
keep...
wala.
yeah.
You can't keep giving
No.
what you don't have.
Yeah.
And for me, that's a remedy for this.
Yes.
There is no other stimulus. We, the businessmen, know what we're supposed to do. But we cannot do what we're supposed to do if somebody else is living off us.
No, you're
I mean,
right.
that's where the crunch is. And if we don't do anything, Ali, I can tell you we're heading for a cliff. We're
Cliff
heading
edge.
for a cliff edge, yes.
Yeah.
Where we just collapse into total anarchy. Because the
And
moment...
we've seen that happen in
We've
other
seen
countries.
it. We've seen it.
Yeah.
We've seen it. It's not rocket science. It's not anything that comes from the space. It's happened here in Africa. We've seen it. And if we're not careful, and the more we wish this problem away, the bigger it's growing.
Do you
so
think-
the sooner we address it,
Yes.
the better.
Do you think everyone's in denial?
To a certain extent, yes.
Yes,
The
yeah.
real decision makers are
Yes.
in denial.
Yes.
And where we are saying, you know, there's no problem. Why are you guys complaining?
Yeah.
You know, the French Antoinette kind of
Yes,
thing.
yes.
We're living
Eat
in those
cake.
days. Yeah, eat cakes. You know, that's the truth.
Yeah.
We have people who are dying of hunger in this time and age. We've seen it, and I'm not
No, you're right.
asking
I
for
saw it.
favors. We
Yeah.
saw it. Now, if people are dying of hunger, surely, and somebody brought out a parallel. When we had exams,
Yes.
examination papers were taken to every corner of this country. Every corner of this
why
country.
can't they take food?
When we had elections, the votes were taken to every corner of this country. Now, when we have hunger, where it's life-threatening, everybody's just going about their own business.
It's very sad.
It's very, very sad. And you know, exams can be botched and we can repeat them. Elections can be botched. We had 2 elections in the
Yes,
last election,
very expensive.
which is very expensive, but it can be, when you lose one life,
Yeah.
leave alone the many that we have seen, it is a tragedy for this country. And really, I pray to God that our leaders will wake up to this reality and face this problem head on. Remove your gloves and let's tackle this problem. One of the things they must address is corruption as well.
Yes.
Because that is where we are also
Do you
suffering.
feel there's been progress in that anti-corruption drive?
Do you want an honest answer?
Yes.
I feel strongly that there's too much talk and very little action.
Yeah.
We have not seen anybody, to date,
Yes.
we have not seen anybody being put in,
Yes.
case tried, locked up, and then people can see, because
Is that the game-changing moment for you?
that must be. And if you look at countries that have dealt with, and I'll give you an
Yes,
example
give an
like
example.
Rwanda.
Yes, yes.
Rwanda, when President Paul Kagame decided to deal with corruption,
Yes.
he removed his gloves,
Yes.
dealt with every corrupt individual to the extent where the commissioner of police is in jail.
Wow.
A number of ministers in Rwanda are in jail. A number of PSs are in jail. High profile. In fact, there's an executive wing in the prisons for all the VIPs.
Really?
It's a VIP wing.
Yes.
Because that is how to deal. And Ali, I can tell you, if you see Ali locked in, James must be very careful
Yes.
to try what Ali did and he got
Yes,
locked in.
yes.
But right now, it's business as usual. And I can tell you, until the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary all speak in one voice about a country called Kenya, we are still playing with musical chairs. Today it's Ali, tomorrow it's James, and a big story. We have arrested this, we have arrested this. Tomorrow, it's gone. I can tell you cases where they are hyped up. The Migori issue was hyped up, it's gone. They arrest people overnight and tomorrow out. We don't even get to know what became of that case.
The theatre.
Because they assume Kenyans have very short memories and they cannot think. My call to the leadership of this country is, let us deal, if the president has any legacy to leave for this country, is to deal a big blow to corruption and deal with high profile cases and kill corruption. And we will forever be grateful. We will forever remember, even if the big 4 don't work and we deal a
Are
blow.
those big 4 going to work? Is there enough money to put to work in the big 4, given the scenario you've talked about?
Again, I'll tell you, we have a saying that once bitten, twice shy. And a person who has been bitten by a snake, every rope on the ground scares them because they think, there's another snake. Now, I look at the scenario we are in, and if what we are seeing recently about the dams,
Yes.
about all these corruption cases that are being unveiled every day, I would rather we shelve the big 4, deal with corruption, and hope that even once the president leaves the presidency, that somebody else can come now and continue with the big four that is devoid of corruption. At the moment, we probably will open another can of worms for people to start lining their pockets under the big four agenda. That is my truth.
Before you go away, and we've only got a few minutes, I want you've been down with President Museveni. I want you to just give your perspective on the region, the political dynamics. We've had all these problems in Uganda and Rwanda.
Yes.
We got Ethiopia up there in the north, where Abiy's trying to sort of spell out some kind of Mandela-like vision and unify his country. How are you reading that regional story? If I look at just from GDP, James, you know, East Africa is growing faster than the South, than the West. Maybe not the North now that Egypt is doing quite well. But how are you reading the chemistry that when you were down in Mombasa? Who are our allies? Who's moving at the right speed? What do you think?
I'll tell you, I was privileged to be in both places. I was in Ethiopia recently with the president.
Did you meet the Prime Minister?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. I actually spoke in the business forum. I was the only businessman who spoke in that.
What did you tell him?
I said we missed the good relationship between Ethiopia and Kenya. We should have built this relationship much earlier.
But we built the road now.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should have looked at the competition that there was between Gabriel Selassie and Paul Lagat. You remember the World Championship?
Athletics, yes.
They dominated the world. They brought those two names up in top of the world, but we missed that opportunity to also bring the economic engagement with these two countries. It's never too late, I said. We can still build. Now, we signed into law the Special Status Agreement, which allows certain companies and certain opportunities specifically for Kenyan businessmen in Ethiopia.
Yes.
And vice versa. It has taken us, it started before Kibaki's exit, and then President Uhuru. It's now law.
Yeah.
It's now a question of building it into practical, tangible applications. So that was a good meeting, and there's good chemistry between Abiy and our president, and we hope that we can finally. And I think I like the energy that Abiy has.
He's got energy, right?
He's got energy,
and he's got a different language.
Different language, very inviting, and I hope that will translate into opportunities for both countries to thingy. Then recently, last week, we were with President Kaguta Museveni in Mombasa. And again, I saw very good chemistry. And the president has this thing right about dealing with the presidents.
Yes.
And for the first time, there was a change of tone with President Museveni. Because he said, look, we have now weighed the two options, and we seem to prefer the northern corridor. And we are asking that because we have opened this free movement of goods and people, we continue opening. There's no point of closing the border, make it 24 hours, and continue. And he actually alluded to the fact that we should now start looking at a more integrated regional bloc of East Africa, where we have free movement of people, common currency, common tariff and custom, removal of non-tariff barriers that have hitherto hindered trade. So there are many nice things that were discussed. And what was pacifying is to see that swing towards now. He has also, President Kaguta Museveni has also said now he will start building his railway towards.
So you think the railway is now destined for Kampala?
It is.
Yes.
It is without a doubt.
Yes.
And the president also said now from Naivasha he'll try and push it all the way to the border, which is a good thing.
Yes.
But it's just that we need to manage the costs of this infrastructure. And take longer term, cheaper loans.
But you saw Ethiopia had to renegotiate the Addis-Djibouti line. So what you're saying is nothing out of whack.
It's not. It's not rocket science. It's something that should be done. There must be prudence in all our engagements so that we're looking at bringing out the best for this country. And yes, we are positioned well in the region. We are looking at even our free movement of labor across. We have quality labor. That is,
well, look at our remittances.
Yes, the remittances.
That's evidence of the quality of our labor.
Without a doubt, yes. I mean,
2.4 billion last year.
Yes, and
Big
growing
number.
and
Yeah.
counting.
Biggest.
Yes,
FX.
and you see, if again, and I talked about this long time ago, if we had good programs, investment programs, where we are asking Kenyans abroad
Yes.
to borrow cheap loans that are at 2.75% or 2.5%, and direct that borrowed money into some investment program where the returns will be higher, the appetite for these loans will be high.
We're going to take up this discussion again.
Yes.
You'll have an open invitation to come
Absolutely.
back. We look forward to exploring. There's so many things to explore.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for supporting the program and coming today.
I'll be here. I'll be your
You're
president.
you could be my wingman. Thanks, James.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Absolutely.
Pleasure's mine.
Thank you very much.